awareness and research. He is a numerical tinkerer who has fashioned several novel algorithms and works at the intersection of real and integer algorithms, and with deep interest in artificial intelligence. He's an active reviewer for several engineering journals, as well as an external examiner for doctorates from some universities in India. He's an amateur astronomer with an interest in the history of astronomy. Dr. Vedam is a history aficionado and reads voraciously on a range of historical topics with special interest in ancient prehistory and the spread of knowledge, arts, culture, and philosophies across cultures. He takes a keen interest in the narratives of civilizations and the application of scientific methods in the validation of historical narratives. Dr. Vedam today will be speaking on the topic of a fresh look at evidence of ancient prehistory, anomalies or overlooked methodologies. So I'd like to now welcome to the stage Dr. Raj Vedam.
Thank you, Shan. This voice is clear. So thank you all. So let me quickly launch into my talk. Typically my talks take around 90 minutes. The organizers told me it's 45 minutes or less. So which means that's okay. It's going to be greatly truncated. And I'm also going to go at abnormal speed also. So please mark your questions. So I'm going to focus on identity in my talk. I'd like to start with some exhibits from recent news. Here is an exhibit where Mizoram archaeologists, ASI, they found a settlement over there called at Wangchia. And what is further is in DNA, this reporter, 2017, said there were Hindu relics found at the Mizoram Neolithic site. Now, I present this as an exhibit to you because the very next one shows you the reaction. The reaction from Mizoram was, as you see over here, no Hindu relics at Wangchia. The protest march over here. And you see this hello new Christian country. Hello independent Republic of Mizoram. And this gentleman over here is the ex-chief minister, Lal Thanghawla, who also took part in that protest meeting. It was popular for him to do that. So here is an issue of identity. When there was a question of what was the archaeology found in Mizoram, when push came to shove, a whole lot of people who are there today want to deny a certain identity and go with something else. I present that as exhibit number 1. Exhibit number 2, a tale of 2 archaeological sites, ASI sites. The first one is a paper from Episodes in 2003, where they took a ship off to the west coast of India to Dwarka, and they did sonar mapping, and they found a 9-kilometer long feature under the 40 meters under the sea. Further, they dredged up a piece of wood and they sent it off for carbon dating to Germany as well as Hyderabad. And they came back saying that that artifact is dated around 9,000 years before present. That is the antiquity of that artifact over there. The second site I'd like to talk to you about is something called Muziris. So Frontline carried a story on the Muziris at last. They believe they found the port city of Muziris. Muziris is important, it's in Kerala. It's a city where the people who uphold a certain narrative on St. Thomas say that he landed at the port city of Muziris. That's why it's important to understand the context of what is going on. And this one says the excavation since 2017 by the Kerala government with approval of ASI has entered the 4th season this summer, bringing forth all of these things. What is the backstory? Here is the backstory on that. ASI had asked the UPA government was Sonia Gandhi and others at that time. That was the time 2003 when they found these artifacts. They asked them for 14 crores to fund further research in Dwarka to find out more artifacts there. And they stopped it. The minute they found these artifacts and wrote that paper, they stopped it. Instead, they funded the research in Muziris. And that's what you see over here. Muziris is what is funded. Now, recently, the newspapers come out saying that the Marxist-Christian nexus exposed in Pattanam excavations. In other words, there is political effort to color the findings from Muziris itself. And here, Professor Vasant Shinde, who is a veteran archaeologist from Deccan College in Pune, he calls it research as dubious. He completely rejected the claims. He said it even lacks professional or academic expertise to carry out such an excavation. Very, very strong words from leading archaeologists in the country. But this is exhibit number 2, what is going on. Exhibit number 1 was Mizoram. Exhibit number 2, Dwaraka, when something was found, how they stopped the research. Rather, they poured money into Kerala, into Museums, where a certain narrative is taking root, which is rejected by the leading archaeologists in the country. That is a manufactured narrative that is happening over there. Exhibit number 3 on identity revisions. My team worked a lot on textbook review in India. We worked in the state of Telangana for a period of 3 years reviewing the textbooks. I'd like to give you one example of a before. Here is a review item from us. This is the before, a statement and question for the 7th standard. This says about Ghazni, he says that his targets were wealthy temples, including the Somnath. Much of the wealth that Muhammad carried away was used to create a splendid capital city in Ghazni. This is the word for word what is there in the textbook, and we were exceedingly upset about that, and we said it glorifies the invaders, and just because it's wealthy, there's a negative association that somehow okay to plunder such temples because they are wealthy. So children are being given subliminal ideas by certain kind of texts. So we recommended a whole lot of changes over there. In the latest revision, they took some of our changes. We had said that you say he raided northern India many times, plundered and destroyed Hindu temples, including that at Somnath, made Indian captives as slaves to be sold in Arab slave markets. Much of the wealth that Muhammad looted, that's the word we wanted, was used to build the city at Ghazni. When they revised it, they only used that last line, nothing else. But this gives you an idea that even today there is toxic content in every state's textbooks on history. On first reading, you don't see it, but you read it the second time and third time, you suddenly find the power of words to communicate a certain idea in children's minds. And that's what's going on over here. We all know about this lady, Audrey Trushke, who wrote Aurangzeb's whitewashed account on Aurangzeb. So clearly, there's an attempt afoot now to control the identity and perception of people. That's what's going on over here. So when I call this out as a quest for identity, Avatans had already called out some of these things. There is, for example, a religious identity, a caste identity, the Aryan Dravidian identity, regional identity, language identity. And we claim that each of these distorts and undermines the underlying framework of unity of the people. And some of them are utterly spurious. They simply can't stand a scientific understanding. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Aryan Dravidian identity. People also go around saying they're world citizens or corporate identities, what they have. They work for Facebook or Google, things like that. But these are merely a reflection of people who don't have a healthy identification, association, and internalization of their identity. When that happens, all these perversions happen. And these are all perversions of the Indian society today. So I call it a war out there. There's a war out there in identity. And there are many players today. If you look at the first, liberal academic bias, there's a leftist bias that has come into the discourse today. The media is controlled by vested interests. Lots of money pours in from abroad, NGOs and other places, vested interests to control the narrative on what India is. Marxist, I don't even have to tell about that. Ever since Indira Gandhi gave a free rein to some of these people, they control the narrative in textbooks, in other words. Finally, colonial. We have been inheriting the colonial narrative also on India. And the bottom line is there is unlimited Hindu phobia. Hindu phobia is bigotry and hate against Hinduism and Hindus. So history plus ideology has been used by these 4 forces to subvert the Indic identity. I'm not going to read all of these things. So, where did all of these things start? If we go to the starting point, I'd like to start with the colonialists. For the longest time, Indians knew who they were. They could go to a temple and look at the epigraphy of the temple, and they would tell them who built this temple, which Raja was there, what did he, good deeds that he did. That was good enough. We had the Itihasas, Mahabharata, Ramayana, we had the Puranas, we had Sthala Puranas. This was good enough for our understanding of history. The Europeans had a vested interest to derive a certain kind of history. So when they came in, there was literally a colonial ideological offensive. They were Anglican church people who, in that era of time, believed that God created the world in 4004 BCE. And nothing could have existed prior to 4004 BCE because God had not created them yet. And God also destroyed the world in 3000 BCE, Noah's flood. And nothing could have survived the flood event. So any artifact that you find in history should be dated to after 3000 BCE. That was the thinking these guys came with. So they took it upon themselves when they came to India to correct the Indic narratives, especially when they found Puranic accounts that were very ancient. One of them, for example, I'll be talking about that later, not today, but tomorrow, the Kali Yuga. Kali Yuga is an astronomical phenomenon recorded in several of the Indic texts, which was uncovered by Weber, Max Weber and others, German Indologists who worked on Indicness. So they found that this date corresponds to 3102 BCE, February 18, 3102 BC, by the astronomical positions. And they were flabbergasted. How is it possible? How can the Indians have memory of an event before Noah's flood? It doesn't tell anything in the Bible. How is it possible? So their entire intellectual discourse was set to let us correct the chronology in India. Indic chronology is all wrong. They took it on themselves to correct what they called were the mistakes in Indian chronology, the white man's burden. That's what it is. Here is some of the motivation. William Jones, he said either the first 11 chapters of Genesis are true or the whole fabric of our national religion is false. This is his idea. This is stated in the Gods of Greece, Italy, and so on. You can look this up. I've given the references. He also said, I'm obliged, of course, to believe the sanctity of the venerable books of Genesis. Max Muller, who we idolize today in some sections in India, he said in a letter to this duke, I look upon the creation given in Genesis as simply historical. So he looked upon it as a historical event, and these are the sources. So bottom line, they imposed a young chronology on India by distorting the Indian calendar. We had a Purana king list going back to the grandson of Pandavas, all the way to the Guptas. We had a king list. But that king list could not be reconciled by them because of the antiquity. So they cherry-picked certain things, distorted certain things, and today we have inherited all of those things. Young chronology, they worked on Aryan invasion. They were the first people who discredited the Indic sources and lapped up by the Marxists and others, and today nobody will even touch the Indic sources as valid points of reference. If ever somebody brings in such data points, they look at them as an ideologue and all of those kinds of things. And also recent linguistic dates of Sanskrit works. So from the colonial, we go to the Marxist. The Marxist ideological offensive is listed by Dr. Bhairappa. Bhairappa is a famous writer in Karnataka, and he had a bad experience on the NCERT textbook board where he questioned the chairman, asking him, why are we distorting the textbook so much? Why don't we tell our children the truth about the textbook? And his chairman told him that no, we don't want to do that. Some of the reasons are over here. They disconnected Indus Valley civilization of India, made Hindus invaders and migrants to India, so that you cannot claim that you are the original inhabitants of India. You too are a migrant, so you have no right to say anything about Muslims or Christians or anything. So that is the motivation. They favored a central narrative over rich state narratives to put down rivalries, I guess. Minority sentiments are privileged. Invasive periods of Indian history is whitewashed, and imagined atrocities of Indic rulers was manufactured. To promote the Marxist values, a deliberate Hindu-phobic narrative was made. Distortions, erasures, biases, errors, misrepresentation are the hallmark of the current narrative. And I'm saying you cannot build a national narrative or identity based on such distortions. And these are some of the luminaries ever since Indira Gandhi gave a free rein. Ram Sharan Sharma, Romila Thapar, Irfan Habib, Bipin Chandra, Satish Chandra. These are the guys who are responsible for the utter distortions that exist about Indian history throughout the world, not just in India. Kids in the United States and elsewhere draw inspiration from these guys to write their textbooks here. So your children studying in this country read similar trash because of these ideologues. This graphic is from Harikiran Ji, who I hope would be here today, but he gave kind permission to use this. Present day, what is happening today in India? There's an identity destruction which is unabated by three groups: the government, academia, media, NGOs, and religious groups. The government, through a process of discrimination and appeasement, infringes on the rights of Hindus and works on getting rid of Hindus. Religious groups work on the idea that they are persecuted, proselytization, and they change the demographics of the country. Academics work through a process of distortion, appropriation, and identity correction, or distortion. and they too work in getting rid of Hindus. And all of these things are working on strings that are being pulled by the Western masters for the Western identity narrative for Proto-Indo-European language and the evangelist pressures. So this is all the background to what I wanted to talk, and I want to go to the root of what I'm saying, the Aryan identity. So the Aryan invasion identity is the basis of the Western identity, because they want to know who are they as a people, and in their narration, they believe that bands of people from the Caspian Sea, Black Sea area, Yamnaya people, they are the ones who spread throughout the world, and they are descended from those people. So they needed to figure out where the Indians fit into this scenario, and because of the commonality which William Jones saw between Sanskrit and all the European languages, they postulated a homeland somewhere out there, and all of that was based on that. So as far as we are concerned, they tell us bands of male warriors from Central Asia. It's very important they're males, because the females' genetic record is not present. Migrated to India around 1500 BCE. They effectively replaced the existing civilization, and they brought an entirely new Vedic religion, Sanskrit language, Vedic ecosystem. And today, unfortunately, this has become a very, very big issue. The AIT or the Indo-European language expansion has become a much bigger story. It is rooted in the quest for the Western identity, and people use three different models. One is the linguistic model to validate some of these things, or to propose what they call as proofs for these things, archaeological models, and genetic models. I'll talk a little bit about these things in the time that I have. Linguistic models have got a limited validity that cannot be pushed back to more than 3,000 to 4,000 at the most years. You can't push it back because you don't have the data. You don't have the data. At most, you might have inscriptions from the Mitannis and the Hittites and so on, and some very ancient fragments of Sanskrit, based upon which they start reconstructing things. You don't have the data. That's the bottom line. Archaeological models in the country today have gone up to about 10,000 years. If you're talking about Virana, you got pretty old artifacts going over there. Genetic models, 140,000 years. I'll talk about that. So, after William Jones found the commonality of Sanskrit with Greek, Latin, and other languages, the European scholars embarked upon studying languages, and they said all the languages have a hypothesized ancestral language called Proto-Indo-European. There is no evidence that anybody ever spoke this language. There is no evidence that such a language ever existed. It is a reconstructed language. It's a language they work backwards, saying that this is the statistical rate of change of how one word might change from one language to the other, and based on that, they try to reconstruct this. And what is better is that they said, all right, on the one extreme, you have Indians who speak Sanskrit. On the other extreme, you have the Polish, the Lithuanians, and others who speak other languages. So geographically, that is east, this is west, center point is somewhere in Caspian Sea, Black Sea area, that is the ancestor. That is how some of these ideas came about, and you see all of these things. So today there are two main thought leaders over here, and they work on saying, let us take linguistics and archaeology and try to see can we validate some of the narratives. And there is Maria Gimbutas and Professor Colin Renfrew. Maria Gimbutas, she said Indo-European language expansion happened in three waves from 4000 BC to 1500 BC, whereas Colin Renfrew said that agriculture was invented in Anatolia, in Turkey, and the spread of agriculture throughout the world was the impetus for spread of Indo-European language. That is his thesis. So here is the Maria Gimbutas' theory on Kurgan, or the steppe hypothesis. She says around 3500 BC, these people from Caspian Sea, Black Sea, Yamnaya people, they started off over here. At the same time, in India, you had Harappa, Birana, Mecca, Redakal. In Egypt, you had civilization. Sumeria, you had civilization. This is not the story of civilization. This is only the story of the Indo-European people. By 2500 BC, she says they spread to Andronovo, and they spread east or westwards, become the Corded-Ware people. And by 1500 BC, they have been specialized into Hittites, Mycenaeans, Babylonians, and so on. And here you see BMAC, and they've entered into India, into Sindh. This is the beginning of the Aryan invasion theory, according to them. And by 500 BC, they have consolidated themselves in the Indo-Gangetic plain, so-called driving the people over there to the south. And you see the appearance of Dravidian in the record around 500 BC. So this is the Aryan invasion theory according to them. A whole lot of Indic scholars have been contesting these ideas for the longest time. I've only given you a flavor of some of those things over here. Obviously can't do justice. One of them is Srikant Talagiri. He uses literary works. He uses a language in the Rig Veda. He calls out the old Rig Veda, old Sanskrit, and the new Rig Veda, new Sanskrit. He calls out the different mandalas in the Rig Veda. And then he says there is evidence for an east to west movement of the Vedic people rather than a west to east. That is the central thesis of Srikant Talagiri. He shows excellent arguments. This is Dr. Nagaswamy. He's the retired ASI general from Tamil Nadu Circle. He and this Dr. Shulman, who is a professor at Hebrew University in Israel, they came and they worked on Sanskrit literary works, and they showed that the oldest Sanskrit literary works going back to Sangam era or even earlier do not show anything but the presence of Vedic ideas. Vedic ideas, Vedic idiom was completely present in all the earliest Tamil works, whether you go to the Ettutokai, you go to the all the various anthologies of poems or various things, you'll find that there is evidence of commonality of literary works between South and North. Next, archaeology also reveals pretty ancient artifacts from 9,000 years before, and this also has put a spanner in the works of Aryan invasion theory that it happened only in 1500 BC, because you got artifacts now showing Vedic ideas going back to an exceedingly long period of time. Indic astronomy. We have irrefutable proof in our works that show that Kali Yuga, I talked about that, 3102 BCE. I'll talk about one more, Kritika heliacal cycle rising in 2982 BCE. These supposed Vedic ideas are now present in India long before the so-called 1500 BCE incursion of these Central Asian guys. So, however, Max Muller, who wrote Indic history literally, when he was confronted with these astronomical ideas, he chose to ignore them. He chose to ignore them. He's written a book in 1862 that says why he's ignoring the astronomical evidence. He deferred to Colebrooke. This is Colebrooke, who wrote about 50 years earlier. He only considered a 1400 BCE time point, and he said the rest of it I'm not going to take into account. I'm going to ignore that evidence exists and continue on literary works and continue. And he set the stage. And even today, when I've talked to certain luminary professors in India, I'm not going to say who's who, it's not good in a public forum, but they said the same thing. These are Indic professors who have talked extensively on Indic ideas, who come and said that they don't believe astronomy is reliable. And when I press them for that, they can't give an answer. Why? It's only internalization of their ignorance as facts. So today, the frontier is an attempt to fuse genetics, linguistics, and archaeology. And how am I doing on the time, Sean? Am I okay? Okay. So this is a little bit of a deep dive on genetics, because genetics is the frontier area today in identity. Today, there are so many people going around talking about the genetic identity of Indians and saying that we have proved conclusively that Indians are invaders to India in 1500 BC based on genetics. I, as a scientist, would like to see, does it make sense? I'm not going to buy the pedigree of the writer. Pedigree might be Harvard, might be Berkeley, might be elsewhere. I might be an unknown guy, but I know my math. I know my science. So I'd like to read the papers and try to see, does it make sense? And this is what I want to do, a deconstruction over here today. Luca Cavalli-Sforza, he's a professor who wrote this book in 1994, and he brought about a pretty good idea. He said that differences between the genomes of different people can give us an idea about who they are and can use that to study human evolution and population history. Very interesting idea. So today what people do is, if I take, for example, if I take any one person over here in this audience, take a saliva swab and get all the genetic markers, it's completely useless. But if I go to a population, let's say go to a locality in Mumbai, or not Mumbai, Mumbai is cosmopolitan, maybe some small town somewhere, Mysore, and I go there and take the saliva swabs of 1,000 people, 2,000 people, and get the genetic markers, you will see statistically a frequency graph like this coming about. It will say that 33% of them carry this marker, 20% carry some other marker, some trace markers. So this is the kind of information you can infer at a population level. When you go to the population, you can start saying things of this nature. Based on this is for the Hazara people in Afghanistan. You can start giving some names to the markers. That's what scientists have done. And you can start color coding the world map to show where is the maximum prevalence of certain markers. And pretty soon we start seeing at a very big picture statistically things happening. For example, here B is only in Africa, the M is mostly in India and going outside and so on. So scientists use, when they started this research, let me do a little backup over there. The human, you know that we have 23 pairs of chromosomes and 1 pair of sex chromosomes, X and Y. So they started using the gender chromosomes first to try and address the issue of identity, the X and Y. The Y chromosome gives rise to the haplogroups is just a fancy word for clustering of some genetic properties. Put it that way, just keep it that way. These are all the different markers that you have in the Y chromosomes, and you can see, just by looking at the world map, don't you see this, when you look at the color, there's a story that is being told. Do you see that? This is the value of looking at the differences in genomes and how it can tell a story. But sometimes the picture is very complicated. When it is very complicated, then inferring a story requires great diligence. Just like they do for the Y chromosome, can also do it for the maternal mitochondrial DNA. And that is all these markers shown over here, just to tell some kind of a story. Now, there are 14 major Y chromosome haplogroups, all the yellow colored ones are shown here. And 90% of the Indians belong to 7 haplogroups, as F, G, H, J, L, O, and R. And 77% belong to the 4 largest ones. I just put in this note over here what they are. R is 38% of Indians carry this. This is a 27,000-year-old mutation in the genetic record. Its origin with a question mark, what scientists are saying in Northern Asia. The H haplogroup, which is 16%, 30,000 years ago, Western India, and so on. Many of these things. So one of the questions I'd like to ask, just as a thought experiment is the point of greatest diversity a source or a sink? Is the point of greatest genetic diversity the source, or is it a sink? So that it cannot, 50% of the world would say it's a source, 50% say it's a sink. There are people who say that India, because of its geography, always had people coming into India. But once you go in, you're trapped by the ocean on these sides. You can't get out. You have the Himalayas on that side, you can't get out. So India is a sink. Whereas the Indic people have been saying, no, India has been a source because of several other information. And genetics also is one of the battlegrounds of that. So just like the Y chromosomes, you have maternal haplogroups. I'm not going to talk about this. Very quickly, I presented this in my talks before, so I'm not going to go into any great detail over here. This is the work by Stephen Oppenheimer in 2003. He worked on the maternal mitochondrial DNA to give a story of the human migration. And he said 85 to 75,000 years ago, a group of people from Africa, they left and they walked the triangular part of India all the way up to Taiwan. And in 75,000 years ago, there's a super volcano in Mount Toba, and that super volcano deposited 6 meters of ash all over India and Pakistan and extinguished the human race, literally. That's what happened over here. And this is the site in Jwalapuram in Andhra Pradesh, where even today you can find the ash layer. And you can go below the ash layer, you can find human artifacts. Then you find the ash layer, and above the ash layer you find human artifacts, meaning that it was colonized for a pretty long period of time. Then about following the devastation, so between 74 to 65,000 years ago, repopulation of India took place in the east and the west. 65,000 years ago, the ice ages had ended in Europe, and when the Neanderthals also got extinguished, people from this part of India, literally in Sindh and Gujarat, they left out, went to Bosphorus, and became the future Europeans, if you will. So this is the story from the maternal mitochondrial DNA. Then by 45,000 years ago, you find groups of people from Sumeria, from India, from eastern part of India. They join in Siberia, and by 40,000 years ago, they crossed a land bridge at that time in North America and became the future Native Americans. This is the story that is told by the maternal mitochondrial DNA, which is very, very clear in the kind of information that it's providing. So people said, I cannot use the maternal mitochondrial DNA to tell me anything about Aryan invasion theory. So instead of looking at the maternal chromosomes, can we look at the Y chromosomes? So a lot of research went into the origin of the Y chromosomes. This table here shows you that the R1A is a Y chromosome that people are saying came from Central Asia into Northern India along with the Aryan invasion theory. This chromosome, all these researchers, different researchers, they are saying, where did it originate? Bashu, for example, says Central Asia. That means he's supporting the Aryan invasion theory, came from outside. Kivisil says, no, Southern Asia. Somebody else says, North India, Southern India, so on. So when you look at the consensus of researchers here, even the researchers appear to be saying that the Y chromosome appears to have originated in India and then gone on. The maternal mitochondrial DNA chromosome, even that haplogroup says the same thing. Very stably it says it's from India that people went out. So very, very clear as far as this is concerned. However, today there is a lot of buzz in genetics from the superstar professor. He's David Reich, and he's from Harvard University. He wrote a very readable book over here, Who We Are, How We Got Here. 5 minutes? Okay. So he does something called genome-wide research, and he tries to talk about genetics based upon this. He said, in his research, Europeans are closely related to Indians, more closely related to Indians than to the Chinese. So anybody in their right minds would have put Indians as the source and said that let's derive a model based upon this. However, he put one layer of abstraction. He said there's a hypothesized Proto-Indo-European speakers from whom are derived Indians and Europeans. So there's some problems in model validity. So this is the current claims by genome-wide research. They say that from Central Asia, 3000 BC, first wave migrations, then into India around 1500 BCE. But before that, 7000 BCE or somewhere, 9000 years ago, pastoral people from Iran came into India and became the so-called ancestral southern Indians. And these became the ancestral northern Indians. And this is what India is composed of. And a lot of debunking of this can be done. I don't have the time to do it. Tomorrow I'm talking again in Chinmaya Mission, 11:30 to 12:45. Please come. It'll be an extended talk where I can address some of these things in greater detail. But the bottom line is, this professor is under a bit of a shadow, let me say shadow, euphemism over here. So a New York Times carried out an expose on this, and it said that serious challenges are there in the Nature's peer review process. In a highly unusual move, paper was accepted over steadfast opposition from 2 or 3 original peer reviewers. Confidential documents made to this person reveal deep concern with the paper's methods and its conclusions. And here it says that the editor went over their objections and sided with them because of pedigree. He's from Harvard University and went ahead and published his books. He's under a crowd. There's one rebuttal over here. I don't have the time to talk about that. Premendra Priyadarshi, he analyzes the paper. I'll just give you the central idea. He says, you're giving me some numbers in your graph, figure 5 or figure 1, figure 3. He says, you're giving me some numbers. Based on these numbers, you have said, if so much of a percentage of genetic content came from Central Asia to India, I'm going to work the mathematics and say, how many people should have come from outside India to inside India to overwhelm the existing genetics? Do you understand? To overwhelm the existing genetics. It's like if you put one pure white Scandinavian European in southern Tamil Nadu, just one person in a village, after 200 years, it'll be so diffused you can't see it, right? That's the idea. So if you claim that such a percentage of Central Asians is there, what is the original population? His mathematics says 4 times the existing population of India must have come from outside India to overwhelm them genetically and then the records to be present. Indus Valley at that time had approximately 1 million people. That means 4 million people have come from outside. There is no evidence of such a migration in any literary works, archaeological works, or any such thing. It gives you an idea of the kind of rebuttals that we can make. There's an impact of sampling, for example. If you did a different kind of sampling, this person in this paper, he said, instead of taking any arbitrary genetic sample, I only take samples of people who are living in the same place as their grandfather. If you're living in the same village as your grandfather, then I'll take your saliva swab and study them. And he found, just based on that, he started getting numbers like 15,000 years ago for Z93. This is in sharp contrast with what David Reich has been saying, that 4,500 years and so on. So in other words, several things can be done. I don't have the time to go through any of these lovely things that I did, but the conclusion is over here. Several vested interests are controlling the Indic identity. Colonial scholarship was parochial for Christianity reasons, and Marxist scholarship is ideological. They want to bring in Marxist values. There is a liberal academic bias that privileges the Indic narratives and completely ignores the Indic narratives. The Nexus today upholds toxic deracinating narratives. Linguistics has got limited resolution. Archaeology shows ancient artifacts that challenge Darwin invasion theory. Astronomy evidence is deliberately neglected. Genetics has got methodological weakness to answer population identity. Claims can only be weak. The most appropriate thing is there's a pan-India identity based on Indic civilization. So one last slide and I'm done. So I put this over here to show what is the importance of the Indic identity. These are the most important contemporary problems facing the world today. Here is a paper that was signed by 2017 by 15,000 scientists. They said that any indicator that you take, whether it is ozone depletion, freshwater resources, vertebrate species, total forest cover, dead zones and everything is negative if you go through a process from 1960 to 2016. And so they said 35% increase in world population in 92, alarming degradation indicators. Among the key recommendations, promote a dietary shift towards plant-based foods and reduce the fertility rates. And I call it out entirely as a consequence of adharmic living. Dharma and adharma have to be interpreted in the context of the Indic identity. And the more distancing we are done from the Indic identity, the more we are lapsed into adharmic living. And we are contributing on a daily basis to these poor indicators. So if we understand our role as per the philosophical Indic identity, it's my strong belief that we can solve some of the pressing problems of the world. That's important for us to carry this. Thank you. Thank you very much.
I do have a question for you, Dr. Vedam.